What's going on, guys? Brandon here. So I want to talk a little bit about the SPY. I'm not going to get too much into market imbalances because that just has a lot to do with like judging the market's overall short limit orders or buy limit orders, or like options volume and stuff like that. It will account for a lot of that stuff. And an imbalance like today, we'll call it like a very aggressive like initiative, right? There's a bunch of initiative taking limit orders to the sell side, and then a overly aggressive imbalance squeeze happened, and we'll call that, I guess, this right here. So I do have an on balance indicator down here to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about as far as volume imbalance goes. We can take a peek at the SPY here. Let's go back to where the on balance volume actually dictated a top and roll over here. So let's gonna shrink it. Let's go here and then drag up on bounce. Sorry guys, this stuff's never working here for me. You see this double top in the on bounce. So the way it works is if there's a green candle and the next candle closes or opens higher in continuation, the on bounce volume moves up. If there's consecutive red candles and the close price continues to go downward, the value drops and the on bounce volume goes down. I don't want you guys to jump too deep into this indicator. It's not. There's so many better things developed in EMAs and trend lines to use. This is just a small example for imbalance in volume and market that the only thing I can think of really. So as the on bounce volume double tops right here, as you can see, the SPY up there had pushed to highs back here, and this was like that last top before the big sell-off. But that bull market, it barely double topped. But the main point and takeaway is the on bounce volume double topped, the lion double topped, and it was already on a downtrend from these two red candles. You've seen the on bounce volume top out on this last buyer's candle, that mini gap up off the 9, and that next day you could have easily got short and not got scared on this pop-up, even though the price action is going up. The volume matters more. So the on bounce volume is already on a downtrend here, 312 on this little guy, but the price had overcame the previous candle, had a little run up, and it didn't really matter because the on bounce volume was already giving you the indication to the downside. But so is the regular volume, right? So that's why I just use the regular volume chart a lot of the times. This is kind of obsolete, but it's good for the example on aggressive initiative and volume. So as you can see here, you could have easily seen the sell pressure here and then a higher sell pressure here, so you knew the next day, even though the price action was up and volume matters more to me. So yeah, that's just this little small indicator. Like I said, don't dive too deep into that. As far as like market imbalance goes, can happen in volume and limit orders and stuff like that. So when there's a ton of limit sells or a ton of put action, it's going to calculate that, and it's going to say, oh, there's a 400 million imbalance, and it's going to calculate that number from volume of short sellers, limits, options, and all that good stuff. And there's a couple other indicators like an OIC and some other stuff that you use with, like I said, if you want to dive into it on your own time and get into it, sure, but there's tons of other indicators that's going to help just as much, if not more, than that. But that's kind of explaining that squeeze where there was a massive over exaggeration of short orders, and a lot of the times market makers, a lot of times it'll go with that, but the market makers will fool you a lot of the times. If it gets too extended, an overly aggressive imbalance squeeze will happen, right? Like the initiative is way too over aggressive. There's too many short orders, too many put orders, and the AIs will actually kick on and flop over and push you out, which I think happened here. And then retailers were just obviously looking for any reason to buy up this balance anyway for a long scalp. So that's kind of what the thought process on that was for me as far as these SPY squeezes. But you can see this thing just take off, and even on the minute chart, the on bounce was telling you that this was coming up, and that one big large squeeze was nuts. So what are we going to look for tomorrow, right? Let's take a peek at the daily here. This is the most important thing to me right now. The 200 EMA directly on top of this candle here, right? We're holding it down at the 200 EMA right here. I would assume pullback. If we do get a gap and push up, it has to most likely hit this trend and come back down. I'd be pretty impressed for it to come back up, hit trend, come back down, and then start holding this push, right? Like we have this huge bullish candle now engulfing a lot of that consolidated action. So it is bullish. Even if we look at the on-bounce volume, it is bullish. And unfortunately, I'm not using the on-bounce indicator. I would have known, actually. Funny thing, I have it up here too on the Gravestone Doji, which was very bearish. It's a very bearish doji. It closed under the weekly trend. There's a higher percentage chance that this would have continued to the downside. But looking at the unbalanced volume for the day, it was already on a higher low and a trend upward. So it kind of predicted that gap up already, right? So I'm kind of like into the day. Watching futures for unbalanced volume is one of the most important things if you're trying to dictate the market using futures and the unbalanced volume for that. So. But what we're going to look for tomorrow, it's in the 200, I'd expect a reject. For some magical reason, it does gap up even higher and presses or just holds the 200 EMA and hugs it tightly before it presses upward. Great. I'd love to see our markets go up, but as far as like bulls taking over and winning, it just remounted the 9 and gave you a big squeeze, right? And it had a ton of shorts already piled in here for the first 200 EMA rejection. We have a gap down. It had a very weak bounce. A lot of people were looking for the next rejection, which causes a giant squeeze like this. So I wasn't too overly impressed with the volume as far as like the squeeze play here. The last time the price action was here and the volume was being traded, we were much higher in price with less allocated volume. So I figure it's more squeeze volume action than anything. So I'm going to look for a reject. I wanted to come down. I can see as far as the early 270s again, but depending on how much this gets bought up here, guys, I was just gonna watch, man. We're just gonna watch. I'm gonna have to see what pre-market holds. I'm gonna see the futures real early. I'll wake up, probably be active in chat on the news feed here. Having this double top on the 4 hour is definitely bearish, but the only thing you gotta do if it holds the 200 and continues higher. If not, it's gonna drop back down, find VWAP and 9 connecting, and then figure it out then. So pre-market we'll watch for, but I just want to give you a quick little insight of how I kind of use the volume, the imbalance. Like sometimes there's a big imbalance, sometimes a little imbalance. Like the report at the end of the day here, 50 minutes to close, there was a flat imbalance. There was almost a very even amount of buys and sells, very slimly favoring the sell side. So with that data and this long run-up, we know there's still not a lot of buyers in this. It might have been a lot of squeeze players, there's just not a lot of shorters yet. So we'll have to see what it does. I'd expect this thing to pull back a little bit, right? Give us a test of strength. If this really is a bounce play, it really has to test these two trends. The 4 hour gray trend is intact right now. The much bigger, stronger, scarier one of the daily is this big white guy right here. Once this thing decides if it wants to try and push through, which I don't think it's going to do, even if it gets up there to the 275 like in a quarter, 275.30s, I think that's going to be our first rejection point. I think it gives a little bit of oomph over the 200 and then pulls back. And seller volume takes back over. But all the more in the morning. Let's check the futures, check the insight, check the imbalance to see how everything's going, and we'll see you guys pre-market.